Hello, everyone. Glad to see that 16 people have joined us. It's always a pleasure. Please continue to stay. We're thrilled to have this exhibition at the Painting Center, a diverse body of work. We have a figurative painter, we have an abstract painter, and we have a person who makes shape paintings, which are actually dresses and quite beautiful. It's a diverse body of work, and it's a pleasure to have them here. I also want to remind everyone that we have an open call going on for a solo show in the project room where you will see Kellie Lehr's work. It's a beautiful space, so feel free to apply. It's open right now. First up in the exhibition is Diane Novetsky. Of course, I practiced everything but how to say her last name. So Diane,
That's great, Lisa.
can you please say your last name for us?
Novetsky.
Novetsky. She's an abstract painter who used bold, saturated colors and biomorphic forms. She's in the Boston area and we're happy to have her, and we're going to have her talk about her work now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first I'd like to just thank both Shazzy and Lisa. Thank you both for having me here and organizing this Zoom meeting. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm just sitting at my home in Somerville, Massachusetts. I'm from Boston, and delighted to kind of give you an overview of my work. As you can see, the best description of my abstractions would be bold, bright, bulbous, and biomorphic. And as you can see conveniently, all the words begin with a B, kind of alliterative, which I like to play on words. How did I get here, and what are my influences, I should say? Over the past 3 to 4 years, we've all experienced great changes in our society, both through the lockdown and COVID, and through all the social and political changes that we've been through. So it's been a time full of volatility and, many, many emotions. I found that, happily enough, it turned out to be a really productive time for me in my studio because there was a lot of quiet. I had isolation, and I was able to give birth to a lot of ideas that had been brewing for many years. Some of the influences of my work stem from many different areas of my experience and training and practice as an artist. One of the foremost in that the essence of my work is really about color, and very bright, bold color. One of the greatest influences right now is the early modernist painter Matisse. And I'm particularly enamored of his cutouts, in which you may be familiar, in which he created works. One of the first was later adapted to a book called Jazz, and it incorporated various imagery from the circus, in which Matisse used somersaulting aerialists and flowers and other figurative elements composed with very clean, precisely cut outlines, and really brought a fresh of new life and air to the practice of painting back in the 50s. So that was a big influence for me. And also, I should mention that I've been around a while. I'm a baby boomer. And as such, I grew up in the 60s. The 60s and 70s were very formative for me. And some of the art experiences and influences at the time took a while for me to incorporate in my work. For example, the color I use, I really feel that there is some element of the psychedelic and pop art influence from the 60s from my work. Although at the time, I certainly didn't recognize that. In fact, while I was in art school, I was more into, I would say, William de Kooning and Helen Frankenthaler. But as time goes on, I realized that those influences from the 60s really had more of an impact on the way I look at color. Especially particularly the bulbous shapes that I'm using. They're kind of cartoony. They're elements that certainly came out of some of the art that I saw then, such as the sculptor Niki de Saint-Phal, the painter Elizabeth Murray, who did shaped canvases of everyday objects. Some of these people who were not really the original pop artists, but the second generation, were people that really influenced where I am today. As far as contemporary art and who I look at, a lot of the art that I initially looked at when I was rethinking my direction was Carrie Moyer. I love her work. You may have seen it at DC Moore, and her work really embodies a lot of feminist sexuality. You know, her themes, her subject matter come from a lot of different places. And I would say my color choices are really different than Carrie's, but the idea of the bulbous shapes, and initially I used a lot of pores, came from her. Another artist I look at a lot is Heather Gwen Martin, who's now showing at Miles McHenry. And she uses very simple flat shapes that certainly influence what I'm doing now. So if you'd like to go on to the first image, we can talk about that. In a Spirited Away, I should mention the name of the painting. If it sounds familiar to you, Spirited Away was actually a fantasy anime by a Japanese animator that came out in 2002. And it was an incredibly innovative animated film, which I greatly enjoyed. And funnily enough, there's elements in it. It talks about this young girl's developments and her passing through a period of spiritual awakening. And there's a scene where she's with her parents and they're entering this area, sort of a house, a mystery house, and her parents turn into pigs and their shapes just become gross and bulbous. And I think that kind of shape really, you know, struck a bell with me, and I've used it quite a bit since then. One thing that is kind of apparent in the group that I'm showing here in this show is that some of them are just off symmetrical. They're not quite symmetrical. I like to create an idea of sort of a human presence, and you could sort of make out the feeling of like a head and body. And it seems like in the drawing of these works, as I work out the composition, I seem to be suggesting figures as well as the female form. And that's something that's very present in all the paintings in the show. So we could move on, I guess, to the next one, which is Memento. Memento is a little bit of an earlier piece, but it really has the same structure. And you can see the color is very vibrant, very saturated and intense. And one device that I often employ are cast shadows. And I should mention that an influence on my work is also the fact that I used to be a graphic designer. And so I'm used to developing imagery that has a very strong graphic potential. And that's something that has really come through in my work, as well as the fact that I'm comfortable working in Photoshop and in RGB mode. And I'm used to thinking about color in very strong intensities. which RGB is based on light. So I'm used to mixing colors of light, not just color as pigment, which is very different as a painter. One thing I enjoy also is having a central form that encompasses the center of the painting. And in this case, I used a bright vermilion, which is surrounded by a quality of cast shadow, sort of an unfolding of forms in space.
So interesting. Does anyone have any questions for Diane while she gives us her final thoughts on the painting, on her painting process? Any questions? Please send them in the chat if you do. We're monitoring the chat.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, I don't know who's talking.
Karen Allen. My question is, do you determine your palette before you start? Because it's such clean color. It looks like you really figure out, to me, exactly what's going to go where and what it's going to be.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad that it appears that way. But actually, I do start with certain color ideas, but more often than not, my work is process oriented, which means I typically don't mix all my colors beforehand. I typically put some down and respond to what I have, and that kind of clues me in as to where I want to go next. And a lot of those choices are based on intuition. Sometimes they're based on just thinking, well, what haven't I done, or what can I do that will really surprise me? I do have certain color preferences that I guess come out, but like in this painting, Sun Goddess, and in New Dissenting, you can see I'm using sort of a marigold color, which is actually India yellow. And I use golden paints. They're all my work is using brushed acrylic on canvas. I do not use raw canvas. I typically use a gesso priming. But to answer your question before going far afield, I do make my decisions as I move along. And many times, even though the image may seem rather simple, a lot of the work is done in perhaps making modifications and alterations as I go. And so that may take me a few weeks to really wrap up a painting.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
I
you're
really
welcome.
appreciate.
Karen Fisher, you have a question as well? I noticed your hand is
Hi.
raised.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I noticed that with each painting, the shapes appear as if you could just peel off one shape after another. And there's no blending of the line. I'm curious about your thoughts about, have you ever thought about blending, or what is it about the edge that's so sharp and crisp that's interesting to you?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, actually, I would say there's some varieties of modulated and blended color in some other paintings of mine that are not included in the show. But I would say this particular body of work, for the most part, focuses on these crisp contours. And I guess that's something that derived from my interest in Matisse, the cutouts, the idea of the clarity of the contour, clarity of the forms. I like that kind of shift in space, the illusion of things, having that overall crispness, rather than an atmospheric or painterly feel. It just seems to be something that speaks to me. And so while there is a certain hard or tautness, I try to soften that with my choice of colors and with the use of line, like in this one, Sun Goddess, you can see the black line, which creates sort of a jump from the yellow to the Naples yellow. So I do try to bridge some of those separate areas with line, but for the most part, there's kind of a crispness, which right now I really like and just speaks to me.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you for all your questions. Now we're going to segue into figurative artist, Tracy Burtz. And I had a nice little discussion with Tracy this morning. And I think for me, what I found so interesting is I'm very particular when a viewer looks at my work. I kind of want them to see what I want them to see. And Tracy gives the viewer the freedom to choose what they see. And I think that's just such a beautiful point. So welcome, Tracy Burtz. And Tracy, let's hear what you have.
Okay, I would say that I discovered the creating art in junior high and my first year of high school, and I never stopped. I've been, I will say, overtrained. I studied in many places. I got my BFA in painting, my MFA in painting, studied at the studio school as well, RISD. And I've spent many years forgetting my education. I felt that I needed to be free from it, just have it and then let it go. And it was very tough. But I feel much freer now than I've ever felt. The pandemic was also a very good time creatively for me. With all that time, it was a time to take risks, a time to try new things, to do anything I wanted. And I created nonstop. That's pretty much what I did for a number of years, those years, as I was alone at that point. In terms of my process, I always begin from nature. I use models, I use setups, and then I take off. It's a departure point, and I do go back to it when I'm working on a piece for drawing or color information, but never to copy, never to, it's just to take from for some information. What happens with me is I do begin with the personal idea. My paintings are mostly about women and being a woman. I grew up in a family with 4 girls and my mother. My father died when I was young. And it's kind of always been how my work it begins that way. It's about women, it's about friendship, it's about motherhood, all the aspects of being a woman. But then it becomes something else. The process itself, the paint, when you work on a painting, you begin. And a lot of what I do is looking at my work at this stage of my career. I've been painting, professionally for 47 years. And I do a lot of looking because wonderful accidents happen in the painting process that are really magical. And if you don't see them, you paint over them. So I do a lot of looking, and the painting kind of tells me what it needs. And it's just this wonderful relationship that an artist, or at least I have, with each painting. I work on many paintings at once because if I get stuck, I tend to move to another, and then I can see clearly after a while what a painting needs. And one of things do happen in paintings. The way it begins is never how it ends. There are some paintings that happen very fast for me. The painting Maya was a very quick painting, Whereas the large painting was a 15-year painting. So, you know, and there was the huge negative space. I didn't know what to do with it. And then it came to me about a year ago. And then I put the city in. But it had been shown, that's Maya. That was a pretty fast painting for me. That happened over a period of a week. And when that happens, it's a real gift. I think all artists know that, because usually it's a struggle. It's a fight, you know, it's rarely easy, but every once in a while you do something. And if you take the time to step away from it and see that it's there, it doesn't need more, it's not underworked. I think most artists, we tend to overwork, and to leave something to breathe is just one of those wonderful things. If you can let that happen, it's great. But that requires a lot of looking instead of just working. So that's a very big part of my process. This was a painting that this is called Night Visitor. I wanted you to really, the viewer is for me, and not for everyone, but for me, the viewer was watching the woman get undressed, whoever that viewer is. So this was the very, very long painting. This was shown in 3 shows, one in New York City before this. And it was very different. The negative space was actually daytime at one point, and then it was just pure night. And it finally came together a year ago when I put the city in. And it has many meanings for me, but I think a viewer brings their own. Is she fantasizing it? Is it what she's reading in the book? Is it the city? She's stopped reading to take a look. You know, I like there to be many meanings to something, and not just my own, as Lisa had said. This was a tough one. This changed a million times. This was a killer. Some paintings are killers, and you just keep working until you get there. And I finally felt that it was there, and I left, you know. So
I think these are evocative, and some of her influences. Of course, when I first saw the show in person, my first thought was Bernard.
yes.
Tracy, what are some of your influences that you want to share?
I love Bonnard. I've always loved Bonnard, but Vuillard, Klimt has been a recent influence. I just saw the Beckman show that was at the Galerie Neue. That I love Beckman. But at a young age, I was very affected by more classical painters, Corot, Courbet, Delacroix, many people. But Michelangelo's sculptures very much affected me since I was young. Just his use of form. He's been a huge inspiration for me, always. And then all the regular, and I love modernist. I love abstract painting, and abstract painting is very important. And, you know, all the components of abstract painting are what my paintings are about as well, except that you have something that you see and know. But
We have a question from Diane. Diane, do you want to share your question, please? You're on mute, Diane. She wanted to know if you saw the Manet or Degas exhibition.
Oh,
and
yes.
what you
Oh,
thought
yes.
of it.
yes, Manet is I should have said Manet. Manet, I love Degas, but Manet's for me everything. Obviously the Olympia is just a knockout. And I lived in Paris for many years, and I had seen it there often. But I love Manet. His direct, clean use of color is amazing to me. It almost seems like he does his paintings all in one day, which can't be. It can't be. But and of course I love Degas, and I love Degas' drawing. But so yes.
I wonder if you just want to share your Joan Mitchell story a little bit, because that
Oh,
was
okay.
that was a fun
Um,
fact. And then we'll
yeah.
move on to Kelly.
So and I always tell young painters this, you know, when you're young and you're so serious and you think you know where you want to go. So here's an example. I was studying at the studio school in Paris one summer, and I was very serious. I was in the studio day and night. It was just how I've always somewhat been. And I've always been a hard worker. It doesn't come easy. And they took us one day to Joan Mitchell's studio. And I didn't understand Joan Mitchell's work. To me, you know, it was just blobs of color, and I didn't get it. And so I was somewhat a little bit of resentful person, just looking at the landscape and not really listening. Whereas today I would do anything to just look at her palette. So I always tell young people this story: don't just listen to older people that know more than you. I love Joan Mitchell now. And it took me many years to understand her. And for a while, when I was trying to paint abstractly, which didn't work for me, I used to copy her paintings. That was an irony. So just to understand her use of space a little bit. So.
Thank you, Tracy. These paintings are very delicate, and they really all the work should be seen in person. And now we're going to welcome Kelly, I've known Kelly's work for quite a while. I actually chose her for a show that I was putting together, and it's fabulous to see how the work has transitioned. And from seeing her work, I never expected it would get here, and it is such a beautiful surprise. So welcome Kelly, who's up next, Kellie Lehr.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah, this has been such an exciting treat to get to show this new body of work all in one space for the very first time. So I'll just give everybody just a little bit of background. So I'm trained as an observational painter and really focused on landscape painting in my training. And then the work that I was doing right before this work, I was working on very pristine canvases. So I would do layers of oil ground to make the surface really smooth. And then when COVID hit, I had to go work small, and I started working on synthetic paper called UPO, which is also a very glass-like surface. I was thinking a lot about technology and the implications of technology. I also have a background in software, but that work really, I started like longing for something more tactile and thinking about touch and care and wanting really just to interact with my materials more. So I started working with these big sheets of raw canvas for the first time. And just thinking about canvas as a malleable cloth, something that could be touched, that could be felt. And thinking about this sort of haptic sense of connection that I was also reading about neuroscience and how that the way that we make mental images uses actually the same neural pathways that our sensory perception is built. So working with these big sheets, I then started exploring like new ways and new forms of painting. So not just necessarily being stretched in a traditional way, thinking about the history of performance in painting. At the same time, I lost a loved one during COVID, as many of us did, and with no real way of sort of having a ritual to say goodbye, I found myself like exploring ways to create this kind of space to feel and shield. So my aunt, who passed away, was also a dressmaker. And I would design dresses in high school for proms and things like that, and she would make them. And then she even made my wedding dress. So there's also this history that really infiltrated me when I was thinking about new shapes. So from that, these works have really kind of taken a life of their own, and I've been incorporating mythological characters, goddesses, archetypes, like thinking about Carl Jung and dreams. And so it's really expanded into different ways. But that's a little bit about the background. So Red Moon Rising is a very new painting. I did this right before the show, so it's almost so new that it's hard to talk about. But I've really been exploring different ways of applying color. And I think about color as a memory, and ways that we can see its residue and see its meaning in different ways. So embedding meaning in the making is really important to me, and using a soak staining method and allowing that color to go all the way through, to me, has a different meaning than when I use it as a applied surface. There's also a group that really influenced me called Support Surface, and they were a really small group of like 12 painters in the south of France in the late 60s. And they were decoupling the painting surface from supports, and exploring new ways of showing paintings and thinking about touch, and also this sort of the underpinnings, the political underpinnings of making a work in the studio, and how decisions in the studio can have those kinds of implications. So this work kind of plays with geometry and the fold, and the organic structures, playing with chance, in a more simplified way. So something I'm working on right now is like just a lighter touch. So thinking about incorporating all these things, but you know, as Tracy talked about, like leaving, doing the least amount possible, if that makes sense. So this is another brand new one, Hera's Joyride. And this one uses embroidery hoops. So there are two at the top, and then there's two on the bottom piece. This top U-like structure is made from using ink, and then washing it in the sink and hanging it to dry. And I'm also sort of drawing with embroidery thread. You can't see in the photo, but you can see here in the gallery. And then again, the soak staining technique. And then this is the first time I've actually incorporated a photo transfer. It's a photograph I took driving to my parents' house. And I think a lot about nostalgia and different kinds of nostalgia. There's an incredible book called The Future of Nostalgia by Svetlana Boom.
Wait, Kelly, I just want to, I point out on your screen where the photo transfer is, I know where it is, so people can see it.
Can you see my arrow?
Yes, I can see, we can see your arrow now.
Yeah, so it's right in here, just nestled inside. Yeah, so I think about nostalgia. Svetlana Boom talks about the idea of reflective nostalgia versus restorative nostalgia, and the difference is how it can be, how like longing for the past can be problematic, and then there are other ways that it can actually be really generative for new growth. And so this is that first one that I did for my aunt. And I just wanted to show it. It's not in the show, but it's really what started them all. And I'm using, thinking about embodiment, you know, using gestural arcs made from the whole body versus just the wrist, using folding. I use a lot of unconventional tools. So I use different kinds of brooms that I cut. And on this bottom piece, those are the marks that are coming from that.
Kelly, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we have two questions.
Okay.
Diane is curious about if you have any Asian influences, because they're kimono shapes. And I was thinking of the kimono queen, which of course now, the name escapes me. She was just in a show, Miriam Shapiro, and someone needs you to explain the title, Here is Joyride. So those are our questions for you from the audience.
I think from a philosophical standpoint, there are definitely ties. that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about pattern and decoration movement and those ties to craft, to women's work, to feminism. Those are all kinds of things that are embedded in the work. And I'm really fascinated by kimonos and this space between when something is actually wearable and when it's art, and playing in that space. My pieces are not, they cannot be worn. They are, to me, paintings and or soft sculpture, but they're playing with our ideas of what that is. And you know, for me, thinking about touch, you know, the garment is something that touches our bodies. And so that's kind of why I'm playing in that space, if it makes sense. Hera's Joyride, the title, you know, I'm thinking about mythological goddesses, and the goddess that Hera, that is tied to motherhood and women. I read about these, I take them lightly. So I also allow myself to kind of play imaginatively with them.
I wish you would just, you told me 2 stories at the opening that were so powerful that will stay with me forever. So I just, you know, as a final warm up, I think the audience would love to hear those stories.
You'll have to remind me which story.
When I said to you, how come the clips were showing, and you very sassily replied, which was fabulous.
So one of my favorite painters is Sam Gilliam. I think he was just profound and very important in the history of painting, to take those canvases off the stretcher bars and to allow those folds to happen. And he uses dress pins in his work, and a lot of them do sort of, they're evocative of these of a cape-like, dress-like structure. And so, you know, that is like in my thinking, but, you know, with my own spin on it, if that makes sense.
And the other story, which was incredible, so many artists worry about shipping the work, and how Kellie ships and brings her work, and these pieces are huge. It's just brilliant. So please share that with the audience as well.
So they're all taken, they're all folded up and put on in my carry-on luggage. So I have 2 pieces of carry-on luggage. My daughter came out to help me install the show. And I have my husband to help me take it home. So but they, you know, each one of them gets a sort of a custom support built for them that's sort of as light as possible. So I'm building these really light support structures out of wood and simple wire, so that there's a simple D-ring on them. But they're all very malleable and able to fold up into very small space.
And if you see them, the ironing is impeccable. The creases are sharp and crisp. She did it with the hotel iron, no less. So any final questions for Kellie here? Karen Fisher has a question. What, Karen, you want to share your question?
Hi, Kellie. I'm curious about, at what point do titles enter? Do you start with the title, or as the work evolves, it becomes what it is? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I definitely title at the end. Maybe sometimes they come in the making, sort of towards the end, as I sort of really understand what they're about. But yeah, they're in the end. And I feel like my work, especially this kind of work, it's really important for me to be like fully present in the moment, to see what's happening. And I do like to play with chance and see what happens, and it forces me to be in that moment so I can react and see where a painting wants to go. I work, you know, in big sheets on the ground, and I usually have an idea of something I'm working towards, but I try to stay open, because sometimes that shifts. And sometimes something that I think might be a garment-like piece will turn into a painting that wants to be stretched. So it's really important that I stay alert and open so that it can evolve in the best way it can. And so that really is also tied to the titling.
We have our last question for today. We have a question from Diane. If she could unmute herself and ask Kelly
Yeah.
herself.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I'm interested as to whether you see these pieces being fully sculptural and standing in some way upright within, on the floor, rather than being supported by the wall.
They, to me, are very firmly grounded in painting. So, my history and interest is in painting and the history of painting and how painting has evolved, and these little seeds of different tracks of painting. And so for me, them being hung on the wall is an important part because they're coming from that history. So I'm wanting them to expand out, but at least for now, they feel very much like they need to be on the wall. Some of these do have backs that are interesting, like this one we're looking at right now, the math myth, Alice Janice and Where Did the Landscape Go, is painted on the back. So it is, I do often, with the folding, I'll work on back sides and front sides at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I was just thinking of an artist who's very, very different in concept, but like Nick Cave creates these sculptures that are very figurative. And he's also alluding to the clothing as the identity of the sculpture, part of the identity. So I was just thinking of the different ways people have expressed that concept of clothing in art.
Yeah, I love that work.
I just want to thank all the artists and all the people who attended. We're so thankful that you were able to come and listen to what these artists have to say. The Painting Center has an open call. I just want to remind you, it's for the solo room where Kellie's work is. So I'm not jurying it. Chase Cantwell is jurying it, and so is Kristen Ostenberg. And you might want to look up their work and apply. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for asking questions and being involved. And yes, this was recorded, and artists, make sure you see the chats because the chats are quite nice. So before we click off, a lot of people had some interesting to say. So thank you all, and thank you for,
Thank you.
and it was good to see everyone.
Lisa.
Okay. Are we? All right, are we all done here? It looks like it. Bye-bye.